For over a century, Dodge has been a leading American car company, producing some of the most impressive muscle cars on the market. But behind the story of Dodge and its founders, the Dodge brothers, hides a dark secret. A bitter feud with none other than the legendary Henry Ford. These two roughneck Irish drunks went head-to-head with one of the most powerful and influential men in American history and nearly destroyed him in the process. So get ready for a wild ride as we explore the drama, secrets, and intrigue of the Dodge brothers as they try to take down one of the greatest inventors of the industrial age. John and Horace Dodge were brothers born in Niles, Michigan in the 1860s. All of the men in their family were machinists. Their grandfather, father, and uncles were all in the industry. They grew up working in their father's machine shop and became skilled mechanics at a very young age. In 1886, John and Horace moved to Detroit, where both of them found work as a foreman and a machinist. After gaining experience in the field, they decided to break out on their own. Horace filed a patent for dirt-proof bicycle ball bearings in 1896. This made him a lot of money, and he shared the credit with his brother, John. In 1897, they started a joint venture making bicycles with a man named Frederick Evans. They called the company Evans and Dodge. This became a huge success, and they were able to sell their patents to other major bicycle companies in the United States. In 1902, they opened their own shop, designing car parts to supply Detroit-based automakers. This caught the attention of the famous automaker Ransom Olds. Their first order in business was 3,000 transmissions for Oldsmobile. The Dodge brothers' business grew rapidly, and they soon became one of the largest suppliers of automobile parts in the country. Clearly, cars were the future of transportation, so by 1903, they completely stopped producing bicycle parts so they could focus more on cars. And it wasn't long before they began to gain some fame in Detroit. Though they were 4 years apart in age, John and Horace were very close and did everything together. They wore identical suits and refused to open letters unless they were addressed to both of them. These red-headed brothers were also known for being heavy drinkers who were rough around the edges. John Dodge was known for having the worst temper of the two. He could become enraged at the drop of a hat. One night, while leaving a bar, he was having trouble crank-starting his car, and a random stranger walked past him and made a joke about it. John responded by punching the man in the face so hard it knocked him across the street. Many of these incidents were kept quiet, but people talked. The Detroit Times wrote that the Dodge brothers caused a fight in a city bar. And now that they had the reputation of being brawlers on record in black and white, John Dodge had to publicly apologize and pay for damages. But then he threatened to kill the owner of the newspaper. Because of this scandal, the Dodge brothers weren't exactly the most popular people in Detroit. The elites didn't want anything to do with them, because they weren't very refined. They weren't even allowed to enter the Detroit Symphony. Once they were ejected, they retaliated by buying the entire symphony. Then, they weren't allowed to join the country club. So Horace built a huge mansion directly across the street from the club, just to spite them. Maybe money can't buy friends, but it can sure create enemies, and John and Horace Dodge were about to meet someone who would change the trajectory of the rest of their lives. One day, in 1903, the Dodge brothers were approached by the famous automaker Henry Ford. The Dodge brothers already had a lot of money in the car industry, and they were experts on making quality parts. Ford had just broken away from his old company, which went on to become Cadillac, and Ford's plan was to start his own Ford Motor Company. But there was just one problem. He needed a lot of cash and supplies to launch the new business, so he asked the Dodge brothers for help with the finances. The Dodge brothers agreed to back Ford with a $10,000 investment. $3,000 was in cash, while the other $7,000 was in auto parts. Henry gave them a 10% stake in the newly formed Ford Motor Company, and they signed a contract promising to work exclusively for him. John and Horace bet everything on Henry Ford's reputation by giving up all their existing clients so that they could focus on making the Ford Motor Company a success. In the contract, there was also a clause that said that if Ford failed to turn a profit, the Dodge brothers had the right to seize all of the assets of the company. For the Dodge brothers, this was a win-win scenario, because even if their investment failed to turn a profit, they would get an entire car company to use for their own business. They were helping Ford with his finances, but they were also fully exploiting Henry Ford at a time when he was most vulnerable. For a decade, these three actually became good friends. John Dodge even became the vice president of the Ford Motor Company. By 1910, there was such a high demand for their auto parts that the Dodges built their own factory that covered 67 acres in Hamtramck, Michigan, called the Dodge Main Plant. Over time, they built as needed and ended up with 35 separate buildings. It was the very first factory to feature their own vehicle test track. They even built a large ramp so they could check a car's brakes and durability while going up steep hills. The factory campus also had its own medical facility, fire department, cafeteria, and more. It was so big, the factory was practically its own little town. By 1912, the Dodge brothers were supplying more than 180,000 transmissions, axle sets, and chassis to Ford per year. If it weren't for the Dodge brothers, there is no way that Ford would have been where it is today. The Model T was beginning to sell like hotcakes. In 1910, there were just 20,000 Model Ts produced in a year, but by 1917, there were 735,000 Model Ts that year alone. As time went on, John and Horace began to notice all the places that the Model T could be improved. So the Dodge brothers redesigned almost every part of the Model T and showed their plans to Henry. However, Henry Ford was stubborn and wouldn't take their feedback. They could see all the flaws in Ford's design and felt confident they could help make him a better car. But Henry believed that the Model T was perfect and wanted nothing to be changed. At this point, the Dodge brothers were making millions of dollars off the dividends from investing in the Ford Motor Company, and the value of that 10% stake kept going up year after year. However, Henry Ford notoriously hated investors. He called them all parasites who were leeching off of his hard work. Ford's dream was to own a private company that would be completely controlled by his family. So in his mind, investors were only there to limit his progress. Instead of being grateful for all the help the Dodge brothers had given him at the start, his resentment caused him to lash out at them. Ford complained that the Dodges were making low-quality parts and practically accused them of trying to sabotage his company. For the Dodge brothers, working with Henry Ford was like walking on eggshells. At this point, their friendship was damaged beyond repair, and it was awkward to work together. The brothers could have settled for the fortune they made from their wise investments, but they wanted more. John Dodge once said, "I'm tired of being carried around in Henry Ford's vest pocket." The brothers knew their worth, and they were sick and tired of playing second fiddle. Ford's Model T was a revolution in the automotive industry, and it was incredibly popular around the world. But the Dodges were determined to outdo Ford, and wanted to set out to build a car that was even better than the Model T. So in 1913, John Dodge announced that he was stepping down from his position of vice president of the Ford Motor Company. He publicly declared with his brother that it was their intention to start their own car company. As you can imagine, Henry Ford was furious, and he swore to get revenge on them for their betrayal. This was about to become one of the biggest rivalries in American history. In one corner, you had the legendary Henry Ford, who had already established himself as a titan automaker. In the other corner, you had the Dodge brothers, who were ready to fight for their relentless pursuit of excellence. This was only just the beginning of the fight. After leaving Ford behind, the Dodge brothers were fully aware that Henry Ford wasn't going down without a fight. In 1914, John and Horace Dodge started manufacturing their own vehicles, and their cars quickly gained a reputation for their durability and value. They were taking 10 years of experience making car parts for Henry Ford, and they were finally able to implement all those improvements that they had suggested to Ford but had been ignored. Horace designed the 4-cylinder Dodge Model 30. The brothers were also great at marketing and got the public excited to premiere their new car. They invented the word dependability for their campaigns, and it stuck as a new word in the English language. Newspapers predicted that the Dodge would be the best car money could buy. And all of this publicity helped to hype up the car so much that more than 6,000 people showed up to see the car on the first day it was available. They charged $785, about the price of a Model T, But when Henry Ford saw it, he dropped the price of the Model T down to $440 in an attempt to steal their business. But many customers decided that it was worth the higher cost if it meant getting a better car. By 1916, the Dodge Model 30 was now the #2 top-selling vehicle in the United States. In just 2 years, they were already proving to be a strong rival to Ford. The Model 30 was powerful, comfortable, and enjoyable to drive. By 1915, Dodge made 45,000 cars that year. Just 2 years later, in 1917, they made 90,000. This wasn't nearly as large as the Ford Motor Company, but they were still growing at a steady pace. Henry Ford was furious. To him, this was more than just a new car company presenting itself as competition. It was personal. He had once been good friends with the Dodge brothers, and they betrayed him. In Henry's mind, their friendship meant nothing, and they were simply using him. Henry felt that they had taken advantage of him from the beginning. And what's more, their entire company had been built on that 10% investment in Ford Motors, which was still paying the Dodge brothers. The Dodge brothers were making 10% of Ford plus all the profits from their own company. So Henry decided to combat this by cutting his investor dividends down to just 5%. Out of pure spite. He was hoping to choke out the brothers financially so that they would fail. Instead of giving that money to the investors in the Ford Motor Company, he opened his own factory, the gigantic River Rouge plant. Then he raised the wages of his workers to $5 a day, which was unprecedented at the time. He also lowered the price of the Model T to just $345. All of these changes made it more difficult for the Dodges to compete, and many people believe that Henry Ford's plan may have been to bankrupt his own company on purpose just to punish the stockholders. Since Henry Ford had made his own factory, it was no longer necessary for the Dodge brothers to make parts for the Model T, but it was still part of the contract that the Dodge brothers were owed stock dividends. In 1918, Henry Ford decided to take complete control of his company. He wanted to get rid of all of his investors so that he wouldn't have to answer to anyone, and Ford couldn't afford to buy out the investors. So he came up with a plan to purposely drive down the stock price. On December 30th, 1918, he resigned as president of the Ford Motor Company and asked his son Edsel to take his place. So he succeeded in crashing the stock prices of the Ford Motor Company. But the Dodge brothers weren't going to take this lying down. They sued Henry Ford because he was making bad decisions that hurt the reputation of the company. The judge agreed, and so the investors won $19 million in damages. Ironically, the majority of the payout went to Henry Ford himself, since he was also a stockholder. By the end of 1919, Henry Ford was able to successfully buy out 100% of the shares. The Dodge brothers received $25 million for their 10% share. Not bad for a $10,000 investment. On top of that, their dividends had paid over $32 million over the years that they had been investors, meaning they had made a grand total of $57 million out of Ford. Today, that number would be in the billions. In the end, Henry Ford failed to destroy the Dodge Motor Company. The Dodge brothers had started with 5,000 employees working at their own company, and by 1919, they had 17,000 employees. When they started in 1915, they made $11 million a year. And 5 years later, in 1920, it was $161 million a year. Finally, the Dodge brothers were accepted as part of the upper echelons of the Detroit society, but their happy ending was short-lived. Unfortunately, John and Horace both died in 1920. Both of them caught the Spanish flu at the crowded New York Auto Show and became victims of the pandemic. There's a rumor that Henry Ford tried to poison the Dodge brothers, and that was their real cause of death. As crazy as that sounds, it doesn't seem too far-fetched. After all, it seemed like there was nothing Ford wouldn't do to stop them. He had already gone so far as to tank his own company's reputation just to get rid of them as investors. Who's to say he wouldn't try to poison them, especially if he knew he could blame it on a Spanish flu? The Dodge brothers were also heavy drinkers, and they both died during the beginning of Prohibition. Some people theorize that they died because of a bad batch of homemade booze. But now that the Dodge brothers were dead, could their company survive? Despite their untimely deaths, the Dodge Motor Company continued to thrive. The brothers had done such a good job at building their brand of dependability that the name Dodge was synonymous with high-quality cars. John and Horace's widows inherited the company. However, unlike the Ford clan, the Dodge family had no interest in carrying on the brothers' legacy. They'd rather take the money and live a comfortable life. So they sold it to the Chrysler Corporation in 1928 for $146 million. Now that they had acquired Dodge, the Chrysler Corporation went on to be known as one of the big three automakers in the United States. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever we upload a video. And if you want to know more about Ford's side of the story, check out this video right here that you can watch right now. I'll see you in the next one.